She is the anchor of Fox News Sunday, chief legal correspondent, and host of Livin' the Bream podcast, as well as a best-selling author. Her new book, The Love Stories of the Bible Speak, Biblical Lessons on Romance, Friendship, and Faith, is in bookstores now. Please welcome back to the program my pal Shannon Bream. I'm delighted you're here. Now, we had a little conversation when you first launched the book, and I'm glad we can go a little deeper. This is your third book telling stories of the Bible. The first two were concentrated on women of the Bible primarily. Why did you decide that love and love stories would be your focus?
So many of these earlier stories that we told, they did have a love component to them, and some of them are really beautiful. You know, whether you look at the original design for Adam and Eve and man and woman and what God had said about them, sometimes I think it gets lost in the shuffle. People think, oh, the Bible's an old, oppressive book, and it has outdated notions about marriage. But man, it's full of really good advice. And if you go back to what God actually said about marriage, it was a very positive thing, and men and women in partnership and really being each other's best supporters, and with the help of God's unconditional love to guide us in how we're supposed to love.
Yeah. I love the way you intro the book. I mean, this is really about God's love for us. That's part of the romance and love that you're getting at here as well. In the intro, you write this. It's a quote from St. Paul. The entire law is summed up in a single command. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, this is so difficult for many of us to do, but how do these stories help illustrate not only God's love for us, but how we're called to love one another?
Yeah.
What surprised you as you saw? Because sometimes when you frame things differently, suddenly parts of the story stand out that might not have before.
Yeah, over and over in the New Testament, Christ is asked about how do you sum up the law, and it always goes back to that about loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and spirit, but love your neighbor as yourself. And I checked, there are not any exceptions. Sometimes we're the difficult person to love, but often we have to deal with people like that in our lives. It could be a coworker, it could be a family member, it could be a neighbor, whatever it is. God didn't say like, oh, you get a pass for them. He says you have to love them the way you love yourself. And we're all born inherently selfish. I think we have to fight against that. But think about how you want all the best things for yourself. And we're called to be humble and to really look out for the good of other people.
Shannon, what popped out at me as I read this, first of all, your spirit is throughout the book, and I know your love of the scriptures. I know this is not just a curiosity for you, it's a part of your life. How did that inform the stories you decided to choose here? I mean, you open with the Song of Solomon. Now, this is one, we don't hear this one from the pulpit too often, or if you hear it, it's in little tiny bits and pieces. When you read it, forced me to go back and read the whole thing when I encountered this chapter. I mean, this is pretty hot stuff. But what does it say about the nature of married love?
Well, that God is not surprised about our passion for each other or that we would have desire for each other. That's how he created us. And I feel like he's endorsing it all throughout the Bible, but really by including this book, it's clear that he wants us to nurture the romance in our lives. And we look at these two people who are yearning to be together, but they want to do this the right way within marriage, and they're working to all those things. But I just love the language is so flowery about your teeth like goats and your arms like bands of gold. I mean, there's a reason this is included, and I always think, gosh, I got to up my game on these lunchbox notes and that kind of stuff. It can't just be, have a great day, XO. Maybe I should get some inspiration.
Well, and that runs to the heart of something that, you know, we were talking about the book before. Something I saw is the practical aspect of this book. It's not just a Bible study, because some people will say, oh, that's a nice thing. That's part of my meditative life. It also is a practical application. There are practical lessons that you kind of draw out of these stories that we can use in our own lives. Tell me about the Song of Solomon, particularly that notion of being the prime support for the one you love.
Yeah, I don't want anyone else to be my husband's #1 fan or #1 cheerleader. We really make it a goal to be that for each other. But that means, too, you may feel funny sometimes, maybe with the more flowery language, but why not stop and appreciate them? Remember falling in love with them for the first time and tell them what you think is so great about them. I think that's one of the best ways to nurture a marriage. And like I said, I don't want anyone to ever have first place. I want my husband always to know that there's nobody else who has his back the way I do.
Now, there's another story that you probably don't want to go around mimicking, and that is Samson and Delilah.
Oh, boy.
Who figure here. Why include them? I mean, this is the ultimate dysfunctional relationship.
Yeah.
Why did we need to know about Samson and
You know
Delilah?
what? In all the books I've done, I include the flawed, messed up relationships and individuals because that's all of us. I mean, none of us are without sin. Christ is the only one in the Bible and our Heavenly Father. And so you think about that and think, okay, I want to make sure that people know, like, no matter what's gone wrong in your life, whether it's circumstances that have come to you or you've made bad decisions, we all do. It's okay, God can work through those. And even at the end of Samson's story, as much as he messed up, he called on God one last time and God was faithful. He was always there and came back to honor Samson when Samson humbled himself and asked for God's help.
Yeah, no, that the lead up to that though is yikes.
It was a mess.
It's a mess to say the least. Yeah, real housewives of Judea.
Exactly.
In a recent op-ed you wrote at Fox News, you talk about the importance of friendship and the love between friends, which you also include in the book. And you point out that recent studies show that men are suffering from a friendship recession. According to the Survey Center on American Life, the percentage of men with at least 6 close friends fell by half since 1990, from 55% to 27%. The study also found the percentage of men with any close friends jumped 3%, or without any, jumped from 3% to 15%, a 5-fold increase. What did that tell you, and why did you decide to include friends as part of these love stories in the Bible?
I think we're created to be in community, and those numbers are so sad to me and really kind of shocking. And I talked to a number of pastors and priests about that number and about friendships and why we aren't better about those in modern society. And they said, you know, we have not placed a value on them like we used to. And we used to be in our communities and know our neighbors and know people at the Elks Lodge or at the Boy Scout troop or in our churches. And we've let some of our houses of worship go. People aren't gathering there in the same ways. So I thought, listen, Jonathan and David, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, people who stood together through very difficult circumstances. We all want those kinds of friends, but it means we have to be those kinds of friends.
Yeah, and I want to talk for a minute. You include the story of Job and his friends. Why that story? Now they came to comfort him, really, after his life, is turned upside down. What was the lesson there, and why include that particular story?
Man, such difficult, horrible suffering that we're all going to suffer, but it's hard to imagine suffering as much as Job did. His friends initially got it right. They showed up for 7 days. Nobody said anything. They sat there in sorrow together, which was a beautiful thing. And I think sometimes we worry about saying the wrong thing when somebody's grieving, but even just to show up, they'll remember your presence. And sometimes that's what we need more than anything. But they got off on a tangent when they tried to accuse him of harboring sin or doing something wrong. And God comes thundering back in defense of Job at the end, saying, you've gotten it wrong. This is my faithful servant. I'm here to defend him. So as friends, sometimes we get it wrong, but if we're there and we're trying to sit in the grief together, that's at least the greatest gift that we can give to someone.
Talk for a moment, because it struck me. And look, I've always seen the parallels between Adam and Eve, and of course, the Blessed Mother and Joseph, and Blessed Mother and Jesus. That they become the new Adam, the new Eve. Talk to me about that, and why? Because you pit the two stories, if you will, against each other, and it enlightens them in a new way.
Yeah, so Adam and Eve were the beginning of humanity, and gosh, God had an ideal situation for them in their relationship, the physical environment they had, all of those things. And then there were so many tragedies, sin, and other losses that came to them. But we see, with Mary and with Joseph, they come together as the new birth, bringing the Messiah into the world, and it's a new opportunity. He's the new Adam. So, he's going to be the sacrifice that covers for all the mistakes that Adam made. That's one person who took us down the wrong path. But with Christ emerging and coming, he's the one person that will then, fully God, fully man, save us from our sins and the mistakes of the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, and Esther is included here as well, who you've talked about before. Esther is obviously a big hero for Shannon Bream.
Is.
She runs throughout all of these books, really. But here you talk about her particular, her friendship. And, you have a woman who's essentially, she's in a beauty competition.
Right.
To win her husband.
On steroids.
Yeah, it's like, the Bachelorette biblical times. What's the lesson here? These are two women who are friends. Sorry, this is Esther and
Xerxes.
Yes.
The king who, when it starts out, he's this impetuous, not very nice guy.
No.
So he does have this crazy beauty pageant, and Esther ends up catching his eye. She has great honor. He chooses her to be his new wife, and we see him change. So we know that he was smitten with her. We don't know her side of the story, if she also fell in love with him. But we know that when she comes to him for help after God's divinely placed her where she was, that he offers her anything up to the half of his kingdom, which in those days would be unthinkable for a woman. So we see him really soften soften. And the lesson I took from it is that, listen, you may be in a marriage with a less than ideal spouse, the way it came together may be less than ideal, but God can still work through you. When you're faithful to him, that's a witness to your spouse, and often their hearts soften through the process.
Yeah, I love the practicality that you draw out of these stories, because I think they weren't meant to be museum pieces.
Right.
They were meant to be poured into your own life and then lived anew, and you do that. Is there any chapter here that you almost didn't include?
You know what was really hard to narrow down for Paul? He had so many different friendships, and I thought, oh my goodness, should these all be different chapters? Should we not try to tackle Paul? He had so many special friendships along the way that we really had a hard time cutting that one down to what we did. But he's woven all throughout the New Testament and shows us how this community of believers, many of them under threat of martyrdom, and they suffered that, they bound together, and they're the early church. They're how it came together.
Tell me about the relationship that almost didn't make it into this book.
Hosea and Gomer is a really tricky one because the book of Hosea is super depressing. It was not joyful. He was a prophet, and the people didn't want to hear from the prophets. They had pulled away from God. They weren't listening to him. And God tells Hosea, you're going to go marry this woman of sort of ill repute. You're going to marry Gomer. She was not a faithful wife. They had a couple kids, and their names are crazy. You know, what the Lord told them to name him, like, I do not love you. You are not my people. But even though Gomer is unfaithful and runs away with other men and gives credit to her lovers for the gifts in her life, even though Hosea was the one providing and taking care for her, it's this picture of God trying to talk to Israel to say, I will always come after you and redeem you. So Hosea, it's a very harsh book, but Hosea's lesson is beautiful in that he goes and redeems Gomer. And he says, you're going to come home with me. I'm going to pay the price to get you out of these debts and slavery and whatever trouble you've gotten yourself into. I'm not just going to bring you home, though. We're going to love each other. This is going to be a real marriage. And I think God so often talks to us that way, that you make mistakes, you run away, you chase other things. I'm always going to be coming after you to redeem you.
No, it's a beautiful story. I mean, it's not a sweet one, but it ends well.
Important.
So that's what we have to focus on. You dedicate the book to your husband, Sheldon, of 27 years.
Yes.
Give me a sense of how the Bible and your faith have held you together. Now, you've written about this. In your first book, you wrote about the many trials both of you went through, physical, real hardships, and how your faith carried you through.
Yeah, you know, when you make your vows before God and in the church and before your friends and family, he seals that together, I think, in a very special way. And we know, we say all the time, we are not perfect. But we're perfect for each other. We believe God put us together. And so we're going to have flaws. We're going to have fights. We're going to have unexpected tragedies. But when you have that to lean on, it makes me wonder how people do marriage without it or do life without it. And there are times we have to be humble. We pray together every night and read from the Word together every night. And I think it's just a great bond for us to say, even if we had a rough day or one of us was, you know, a little antsy and unkind to the other, we're always going to come back to that place where there's something greater that binds us together.
What are people telling you about this book? I know you've done book signings. I know you've been doing a ton of media. What are they telling you about the differences? Because look, there are a lot of meditative books, there are a lot of biblical studies out there. Why do you think this one has resonated? And boy, has it resonated. New York Times list over and over and over again.
You know what I love is that I have so many couples telling me they're doing this book together. And that's not something I heard from the earlier books. They were more focused on women's Bible studies and those kinds of things. Although I've had men's groups tell me they've done them too. But this one I love that people are reading through together and hopefully strengthening their relationship and being inspired and renewed by what God tells us about our relationships and how beautiful they really can be.
Okay, what's next? I hope not like, great meals of the Bible speak, but that could be a good one.
We talked about manna.
Yeah, manna.
You know, there's some other good ones that we could have
fish,
in there.
Jesus cooked the fish for the apostles.
Feeding 5,000.
Yeah, look, there are a lot of options.
If you do big group events, there are.
I'm giving you the next book. And this could have a culinary crossover and a Fox Nation special.
Raymond, although I can't cook, so I would be quickly exposed.
Sheldon can do the cooking.
Sheldon is an
you
amazing cook. He's an amazing cook among all of his other great qualities. I am going to try a fiction book that is definitely got a thread of faith through it, but it's one of those things that I woke up and it came to me. And I felt like, okay, Lord, you've dropped this in my lap, helping me to steward it. I've already told you I'm coming to you for pointers because I've not written fiction. You do it so beautifully. And I'm going to pick your brain on how to do that. But there's a message there that I want to share.
I am happy to help anytime, and I'll bring my next Bible study to you. The Love Stories of the Bible Speak, biblical lessons on romance, friendship, and faith is available at bookstores everywhere and online.